So guys, I do want to talk about the 48 hour film project. And I know I've done a couple of videos about good experiences and bad experiences, but I also just wanted to talk about some life lessons from where I'm at right now. That when I first did the 48 hour film project, I had a really great time. It was like a honeymoon period where I kept seeing a lot of films. And I remember I went to New York City and I saw this film that was really, really great, and then I felt really hurt that it didn't win, and it actually lost to a film where a bunch of people were throwing grapes at each other in an office building, and I kind of just in my head got a little mad because I was kind of like, what are these judges thinking? It's kind of like just silly movies or funny films actually always winning. And I think that's always been a problem with me when I came to the 48, that sometimes we all work very hard as filmmakers. We take our art very, very seriously. And sometimes I think we actually, some of us kind of have really good intuition about what type of films would be very successful. And I always think that emotionally powerful dramas and very, very moving films will always do better than comedies. But I always kind of think that my first problem is that I had what I call a very Jim Cornette approach, just like the wrestling booker and promoter, where, if there's something that goes really against his belief system, he's always going to talk about it and just and shit all over it, really. And I think that honestly, that's another problem too. Is that sometimes it's I think it was Gandhi who famously said, "You know what? Be the difference that you want to make in the world." And that shows a lot more maturity than somebody actually bitching and moaning and complaining. And then the other thing too with filmmaking is that it's always that thing when it comes to filmmaking, that it's always easy to be the outside person looking in. So it's different when you are watching a movie and you're critiquing it versus actually when you are making a 48-hour film project, when you are doing it fairly, where you are getting your idea, and then also you have a cast of 10 people. Let's say you have 50-50 experience, so there's something, so you may make some mistakes, and you may have a team where maybe half the people show, and then also you have to change the script, and then maybe you don't have much experience as a lot of other people, so it may be hard for you to actually kind of put something together, really. So sometimes when people watch the 48-hour film project and see all the movies in theaters, sometimes it's very, very easy to kind of ridicule the movies that are being created, because you can say, oh, well, you know what, it is a bunch of silly comedies or whatever. It's hard to make a film in a weekend. And usually the people who have really good ideas are people who actually just have a lot of experience, or sometimes they will cheat, where they may say something like, okay, they tell you all 32 types of movies you're going to create, so therefore you're going to write maybe 3 or 4 sentences about every film, and then you're going to take some films and be like, okay, well, if I get pulled these 5 genres, I'm going to actually just make a movie off of that. There are people who do cheat like that, and I've actually had friends who confess to cheating, saying, oh yeah, I wrote that script a while back. And then sometimes you got to kind of question a team. Let's say if you have a team and the special character is a bowler, and somehow these people have a bowling alley, or one year there was a character that was supposed to be a boxer, and then many people have access to gyms, and then some people don't. So it kind of questions, how do they kind of always have all these locations. And it may be one of those things where, as I said, unfortunately, if they're friends with the city producer, and the city producer's like, oh well, yeah, I know that you work at a gym. I know that you film videos at a gym. Maybe I'm going to make the special character something in your favor. Oh, well, Byron does a lot of traveling, so maybe I'm going to have him have the special character be, somebody traveling on a plane, type of thing, really. So there's always kind of, understanding that sometimes if there's a very strong film, somebody could be doing it with integrity, and some people can be doing it with lacking ethics, really. But I think that honestly, when there are people that's always criticizing the films that are being made, you got to give people a break, really. And ultimately, as I've said, there's a lot. It's a lot easier to bitch than actually make your films. And then there's also some people, like I've said before, who are lifers, and that's one of the worst things you can do is be a 48 lifer, and that just means you have nothing else to do in your career but make 48-hour film projects. If you want to be a successful filmmaker, you have to do projects outside of it. Like with me, I have my vlogs, I have my YouTube channel, and I'm very happy with that. Filmmaking is a hobby. If I really want to be an actual filmmaker, I need to learn interpersonal skills. I need to actually, work on projects and volunteer and keep pushing myself forward and learning from learning from successes and failures, and then I'll get ahead, really. But yeah, it's not just my life is around the 48. And I also think the other thing that I've kind of learned is, you know, not expecting, not expecting a reward. And that just means that, I did the competition like 16 times, and I felt like I was entitled to respect. And I also did something where, you know what, I've actually shared that I was struggling with suicide and depression, and like, I should be looked at as a person of perseverance. But it really doesn't matter, because I learned in filmmaking that, there's a couple of things. That number one, it's really about who you're friends with. And then number two, definitely there are agendas. Like, again, when I first did it for One City, people were talking about me being the black guy. So if I was kind of like, saying, oh, well, I was almost murdered by the police, I'm a black man almost murdered by the police, or I experienced racism, maybe people will gobble that up. Or if there was a girl and the girl made a film about herself being raped by a black man, people will probably gobble that up, because they're like, okay, well, you know what, they're very pro women, and sometimes there may be some people that are pro, like, LGBTQ or pro this race or that race, but sometimes when it comes to race or gender or sexual orientation in filmmaking, we see this, is that people try to representation without representation. They'll just like want to do their own agenda. So, like I've said, that I definitely kind of felt that sense when I did it. But I also feel like that sometimes you just don't know what people are looking for, and sometimes they're not always looking for that person that's like, okay, well, I'm not in your clique. I've worked hard, I've committed, I am dedicated, I've learned and grown. Sometimes they look for that. Sometimes they look to push their own people. Sometimes they look to push certain agendas. And that could be being pro women, that could be being pro black, that could be being pro Asian, that could be being pro LGBTQ, that could be being pro learning disability. And sometimes, as I've said, there's a difference between maybe somebody who's autistic making a 40-hour film project movie and talking about their experience, both good and bad, and then actually somebody who's autistic who can't really make a film, and they make that person the director, and then everybody in the project are people who just actually join help this person make a film, to be like, okay, look at us trying to, out of the goodness of our hearts, actually help a person, when actually it's more like, I want to look good by being associated, instead of actually really caring about the person. I've seen that happen with other groups of people, really. It's fakeness. And then some people don't realize that that's actually fakeness as well, really. Because it's just like, you should kind of support people just to support people. You shouldn't be like, well, I'm going to work with this group, and then be like, okay, well, I worked with a black man, and, hurrah for me. Or, okay, well, there's one black man in the city, so everybody kind of help him out, because we really want to just help him as a community. But then next year, or these other projects, like, nah, I don't want anything to do with it. I just wanted myself to look good. And sometimes it happens, but that's not really a 40-hour film project thing. That's really just a filmmaker and a cultural ignorance type of thing, really. And then I also will say that I know I've talked about my experiences with different 40-hour film projects, both good and bad ones. And I know, like, that I take a lot more responsibility. And I think that that's going to be, like, the second part of this video. That I know, like, when I did it for the New Haven competition, I will kind of share some things like they were like, people were asking like the state producer, about what a family drama is, and I said The Godfather because I want to be kind of a smart ass and be like, you know what, well, I hate kiddie movies, so maybe if I said, okay, well, somebody can interpret the family film genre, and say Godfather or The Sopranos instead of its actual definition of kid friendly, that will probably make a better film. But then again, it was kind of like what I was doing. I was kind of being smart ass. I was kind of being really arrogant. And then, like the first year, I didn't make a great film, and I've kind of said this story before, where I actually lost to somebody who only did 2 seconds of acting. There were a bunch of people saying, it's unfair that I didn't win, and somebody told me that the little girl who actually won Best Child Actress, she was friends with the judges. Her parents were one of the judges, and she's kind of like friends with like a lot of people running the events and other things like that. And everybody treats her like the little girl of New Haven. But I remember like learning doing something really bad was that I kind of got really angry, and then when people are saying, "Oh well, it was unfair, you got screwed, Byron," I kind of responded with vitriol, and in many different ways. I think that honestly, yes, I was upset, but I actually had to understand two things. That one, you don't allow other people to trigger you, and I'm very happy that I've actually been upfront about how I've been harassed, and I've been in many situations in the New Haven 48 by filmmakers and by some event runners where I've been harassed and I've been triggered. So it's good that I acknowledge that, because if you are intentionally upsetting somebody or trying to get somebody stirred up, there is personal accountability, because there's a lot in my life when somebody gets bullied, blaming the person being bullied, but not the when the person who's getting bullied gets upset, most people blame the person who's getting bullied for their bad behavior, but not the bully who actually initiated the behavior. And that was kind of a lot of that in New Haven. The first year I did it, there were like two people. There was like this guy, Doug Dangerman, who was saying it's great that a black man is doing the New Haven 48. And then there was another woman who was an actor trying to join a team that was saying, you know what, Byron, why don't you want to work with me? Are you just a black guy who wants to work with other black people? You have a preference for black women and all other things like that. So the first year I did it, that there was just a lot of that type of, I'm the black Negro, I'm doing the New Haven 48. But I also remember at the event being antagonized because people were saying that I lost to unfairness. So I kind of learned a couple of things that, definitely when people are trying to push your buttons and when people are saying racial stuff, you always have to pay attention to that. Because when I was a kid, I just was always taught to kind of let things go, or just be like, okay, I was not really that educated on people. So I kind of had a mentality, well, that's just how people are. People are just still very bigoted. And that'd be that really. But I've also kind of learned that maybe sometimes people will say things to get me upset, and therefore, as I learned through my counselor, that maybe what some of the things that people wanted to happen to me was to have me hurt my reputation, or to have something on my permanent record in the Connecticut film community. So people are like, don't work with this guy, even though he's very cultured. But he may be like socially neurodivergent, or he may be a neurodivergent person. So I kind of learned not to kind of set myself up for failure, and not to kind of be triggered by people, but also kind of talk about any type of organization where it is a film festival or a film competition where there is bullying and there is kind of harassment towards me. But definitely how I kind of responded by mouthing off at the event and then just talking about it being unfair online and other things like that, that was completely inappropriate, and I acknowledge that. And then, the following year, I was going through a hard time, and I blew up on stage, and I remember how that was traumatic for me, and it was the same idea, where there was many attempts to antagonize me. There were people responding to me in emails where there was a bunch of gaslighting, which means that they said, they kind of were saying, too, that my issue was that I don't appreciate their hard work, I don't understand winning isn't everything. They're trying to make it a competition that's fair for everybody, when actually what was it? I remember like one year they had 23 people nominated for a Women in Film Award for one category on somebody's film. That many people were kind of saying that, you know what, you got to be, the state producer's friend. And then the other thing was that I felt antagonized and people were calling out on my race. So just to kind of say, you know what, the issue of all that is Byron is a sore loser. He doesn't appreciate the hard work that goes in. That was not right. And then I kind of learned that me and some of the people running that event, we both had issues with being vindictive with each other. But it was unfortunate that I blew up on stage. I was going through a very hard time in my life, and I've kind of shared what was going on another video where I was struggling with suicide and depression. I was living with a relative with inappropriate behavior, mental health issues. I was overcoming workplace bullying, and then I was spending time away from my father because he did some very hurtful things to me. And my dad was also running for governor of Connecticut, and he was mentioning some very inaccurate things about mental health issues and race issues regarding, his regarding me and my other brothers. And I remember being very angry about it. But it also taught me a powerful lesson about how I have to stop being a person that gets triggered by what other people do to me. And then I've also kind of learned that whenever I get bullied or treated poorly, to kind of say, okay, well, this is the full story of what went on, really. It's not just me getting upset, it's other people upsetting me. So it does kind of say, okay, well, I need to have more emotional maturity, but people also have to understand that if I'm being targeted, and people know that maybe I may be behind socially, there is ableism, and that also if people are saying things about my race, there is racism. And then also too, if I'm being intentionally antagonized by the same people and I'm being had my buttons pushed by the same people, it is harassment. And then if that's a way for people to just say, okay, well, we're going to work this guy up, so that way he kind of erupts and gets upset really and then doesn't come back. So that way we have a competition where it's the people that we like, and then we're pushing away people. We find strategies like upsetting somebody. Then the 40 Hour Film Project, it's good to kind of put tension on that, because then it's not a competition for everybody. It's like what people say, it facades itself as that. It's actually really just they want their own people to be successful. They want to celebrate their own people, and it should not be an environment of vindictiveness or a facade, really. And though filmmaking can be a bunch of mean people and it can be a very mean business, if it is a competition that's trying to encourage a nurturing and supportive environment and a film community, if it's trying to have a situation where people experience ableism, people are talking about people's race, if people are being vindictive, if people are just being really fake nice and picking and choosing who they want to respect and disrespect, and being an environment where people just have anxiety about wanting to come back, then really those things need to be talked about, because then it's not a competition for everybody. And like I've said, what would happen if somebody did the competition and they got so mad that they want to be like, oh, I want to take revenge on this competition and do something horrible because they felt like bamboozled, or they felt like they put a lot of financial or personal investment, or me doing it 16 times and having like $4,000 or $5,000 in credit card debt. It needs to be a competition for everybody. And I think that when I look at how people behaved in the past, there was an issue with emotional maturity on the side of people that offended me, the same way there's emotional maturity on my side. And then the last thing that I would say was, like, the last year kind of hurted me when I was working with this filmmaker named Sal DeGreco. And he was saying things like, you know what, you are a shitty filmmaker. Nothing in your fucking life has ever been good, you fucking. And I kind of worked on his project for a couple of months. He said that he was not participating. He actually helped this filmmaker named Abigail, and they made a film, and he looked like this really great mentor, but I actually gave him the idea to help her out and other things like that, really. So he was kind of really an idea thief. So I learned from that experience that, again, I was going through a lot of depression. I was being hurt a lot by a lot of people. I was going through a lot of just hard times in my life. I lost a lot of close friends. I even thought about suicide. But I remember like how during that time I was just emotionally just hurt by a lot of things. So I learned that sometimes you got to separate and work on yourself, but not be around people. Because sometimes when you you're going through a lot, people can kind of be like, okay, well, you are going through a lot, so I'm going to take advantage of you because either you're behind socially, you may be naive, or you may not have the best head on your shoulders right now. Like a predator, just like a just like basically like an idea predator type of thing. And I remember how that hurt me a lot. But also too, like I met some really great filmmakers. So definitely, again, the people that usually are the mean ones, they don't really have a long term career. But also, it makes me feel good to talk about, you know, um, how I feel, and then the people who've actually done wrong to me, because it makes me kind of say, you know what, they haven't gotten away with it. And I also will kind of say, like, the last part is I remember, like, after bad experiences the second time around, that I kind of felt very anxious to be doing films in Connecticut. I felt like, I can't do films here because I felt like I was like the village idiot of the Connecticut film community, and then people just saw me for my race, or people saw me as a troublemaker, or people would want to push my buttons, so then I look emotionally mature and crazy when actually there's a side of bullying, and there's a side of taking advantage of me, and there's a side of people like I remember like Sal. I think it was this guy like Russ or whatever. That that they were both making a film, and they both went outside and had a conversation, and they walked back and said like we just had a conversation on how to use you and other things like that. So I learned a couple of things. I think first of all, obviously, you really have to identify who's an asshole and who's not an asshole. When people are objectifying you, you know make that your last day that you work with them. Sometimes leave on the spot, but sometimes make that the last day you want to work with them. And then also too, if people are saying things like, "Oh, well, you're unreliable," or "We are hearing that you left this project," you got to say no. I left this project because I was being bullied. I left this project because people were talking about my race. I left this project because I was being harassed in emails, or oh well, um, at this event, people were saying it's great that a black guy was doing it and making comments about my race. It's always important to kind of say, you know what, be honest as possible, be honest 100%, but also say this shit has been going on, so that way people understand that it's not just the side of it's not just people criticizing you and saying that here's the backstory to it. And I also will say that always be resilient, because obviously, even though some things were traumatic for me, and I felt very weary of working with people in Connecticut, and I also kind of had like my own stereotypes about Connecticut filmmakers being bullies and racists and manipulative and conniving and backstabby. And I remember like one time I was so emotional. I said, I wish there was a hydrogen bomb that could be dropped on the Connecticut film community and vaporize everybody, because it seems like everybody's a sociopath. You know, I'm happy I got past that. I realized that, again, there's some people that are assholes. There's some people that learn that, that old school attitude in Hollywood of being an asshole, using people, emotionally abusing people, so people don't want to better themselves, so that way you're the only person going ahead is the way to go. And that's worked for people, but that doesn't mean you need to be like that. And then the last thing I'll talk about is my experience with a man named Reno, where I wanted to learn how to be a director and have him as a mentor, but people have warned me about how he can be a nice guy, but also he can kind of be mean to certain people. And then he was saying something like he was working like 3 or 4 days in a row of 16 hours. He wanted me to actually, in the middle of that series of days, actually go down to New London to see his film in theaters. I couldn't do it. Then I said, I'm going to actually gun it. And then my heart was racing. I almost like knew that if I saw his film in theaters, I would have gotten a heart attack because I'm working 16-hour days in a row. He kind of said I'm a waste of time. I play the victim. And you know what? I'm not serious about filmmaking. And he's a psychiatrist, and and then he psychoanalyzes that I play the victim, and he attacked my insecurities and moved on with his life. And a lot of people kind of said that, about him is that, he can kind of be a mean person, and then he can also kind of he can pick choose who he wants to be nice to. And I know some people who were former students who kind of take that mentality of psychoanalyzing and hurting feelings and trying to control people, or stop people from reaching their greatness. So it's like what my aunt said, that definitely in many film communities there's a lot of people who are big fish in small bowls. So that means sometimes they may be arrogant and just be rude and nasty to people because they don't know how to kind of go down to Hollywood and challenge themselves, or live up to their full potential, or be like, you know what, I want to create a narrative, I want a sense of power, and if I get power by just being like a god of filmmaking, where I say like, okay, this person wins, this person loses, this person has potential, so I'm gonna be an asshole to this person because I know that they more likely they're on the track of being something great. If they go this direction, more likely they're gonna figure it out. Or I just don't like this person, or I think this person's weak, so I'm gonna treat this person like they're weak. That's all not good, really. So it's always important to treat people with respect. But ultimately, when you're not respected by people, you always need to be resilient, and also never just become that same type of just being a jerk or criticizing. And sometimes if we realize something's mediocre for us, if it's 40-hour film projects and are not well made, then it's a motivation to say it's not the right challenge for you. The same way, I think early on when I kind of saw a lot of mediocre films, I kind of told myself, you know what, I can do way better. It doesn't mean that I participate in the 48. I find other opportunities for myself. Like, honestly, if there was a 40-hour film project around and the genre was like wrestling, fantasy booking, I would definitely do a really great job with that, because of the way I'm doing things. So, it's important to be resilient. It's also important to identify mean people. It's also important to identify your own weaknesses and but also identify also your interpersonal weaknesses. Like, definitely how I may have a weakness for getting my buttons pushed by people. And then also, you always have to have counterattacks. Like, as I said, that I think that one benefit I've had is that I've definitely talked about my backstories about people who have hurt me. So when people want to say, okay, well, Byron's the black sheep of Connecticut, well, then I'm like, well, you know what? I've been labeled a black sheep because people have pushed my buttons. And then, as Dave Chappelle joked about in the Mad Real World, there's many times where a person of color like me, or somebody with mental health issues, or maybe behind socially or trauma and other issues, want to apply myself, want to be better, want to live up to my expectation, but people will push my buttons to nerf me or make me give up, or be like, okay, well, everybody look at that crazy black man, or that angry black man, or that unprofessional black man, or whatever, really. And then also, like how I said that, first year I did it, people were talking about my race, they've had some black people actually be successful in Connecticut, but it's almost like someone who's really cultured and knows a lot, has an education in art history and in science and other things like me, it's like, nah, we don't want that type of black. We want the one that's maybe not as cultured, but we're gonna put stuff on him so they kind of come back as the token minority, So it's unfortunate that's like that, but just always be resilient. That's the big thing. And then also, as I've said before, just whatever there is a bunch of unprofessionalism, let's get talk about solutions. And then also just always, if a competition's not right for you, there's other ones. And they may gaslight and be like, okay, well, Byron, you're a sore loser, you disagree with how we pick awards, when actually it's other issues around unprofessionalism, double standards, and other things like that. So definitely, as I've said, that I'm not going to let people stop me, and I'm not going to let what other people say about me stop me. And if people take advantage of me, we'll learn how not to be taken advantage of, but also hold people accountable. So I'm very happy that I've learned to move past the 48, but also teach lessons so nobody else gets hurt and taken advantage of the same way.